Our top focus this hour, we are getting the first reaction from the United States on the unfolding Sudan crisis. The United States says that it is deeply alarmed at the reports of a military takeover in Sudan. U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, says, and I'm quoting here, the U.S. is deeply alarmed at the reports of military takeover of the transitional government. This would contravene the constitutional declaration and the democratic aspirations of the Sudanese people. U.S. reaction comes after armed forces detained Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok after he refused to support their coup. Sudan's information ministry said in a statement, I'm quoting yet again, after he refused to be a part of the coup, a force from the army detained Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and took him to an unidentified location. Before we move on, let's just get you all the developments from Sudan first. The country's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been put under house arrest after joint military force besieged his house earlier today. Sources also indicate that the forces arrested 4 cabinet ministers, 1 civilian member of the ruling Sovereign Council. According to reports, the internet has been shut across the country amid violent protests. The country's information ministry says that the Prime Minister was detained for refusing to be a part of the coup. Civilian members of the ruling council also detained. Meanwhile, demonstrators blocked roads and set tyres on fire to protest against the army. Earlier in the day, hundreds of pro-military protesters had taken to the streets of Sudanese capital of Khartoum to demand dissolution of the embattled transitional government. Demonstrators blocked major roads and bridges in Sudan's capital, cutting off the central area from the northern neighborhoods. The development comes amid growing tension between general and pro-democracy movement supporters, which fueled the earlier uprising against former President Omar al-Bashir. Security forces fired tear gas to disperse the protesters and open the blocked roads. Video on social media showed protesters fleeing over the bridge onto the Nile Street, and the current crisis surfaced with a coup attempt in September, with the protests raging in the country since then. Now, the souring relations between the military and the civilians in the ruling government have threatened Sudan's fragile transition to democracy since the military's removal of al-Bashir in April 2019. Now, Sudan's powerful generals and key civil society factions signed a power-sharing deal in 2019 to spearhead the post-Bashir transition and bring stability to the region. These recent escalations of crisis come just weeks ahead of the scheduled transfer of leadership from the military to the civilians. The United States, meanwhile, has reaffirmed its support for a democratic transition to civilian rule in Sudan. U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, underlined Washington's support for a democratic transition on Saturday during talks with the head of its ruling council and the country's Prime Minister. Feltman met with the head of the Sovereign Council and his Deputy General to discuss this ongoing unrest. Now for more on this, WION correspondent Patrick Oyed is joining us live from Juba, from South Sudan. Thank you so much for joining us, Patrick. Now, what can you tell us about the situation on ground right now?
Yeah, the situation in Sudan is tense. According to the people we spoke to this morning, we had been trying to connect to our relatives, our colleagues who are in Sudan. It had been very difficult until this morning, when we managed at least to go through via phones, and they were telling us that the military have deployed heavily in Khartoum city. There are about 5 bridges that connect Khartoum to another twin city, Durman. These bridges are all occupied by soldiers, and most of the buildings, the tall buildings in the city also are occupied by the soldiers. Soldiers are on the rooftop of those buildings, and people are all concerned because for some time now there have been protests. Conflicting groups have been protesting, and one group supports the army, that the army should take complete control of the country. Another group has been protesting that civilians should take full control of the country. And now the military have moved to arrest some ministers, and of course Prime Minister Abdallah, we are told, is under house arrest. Where he is not also clear to the people, but the army have not come out to declare that they have now taken over. Only that through this action, people are concluding that the army have now actually taken over the country.
All right. All right, Patrick, thank you for clarifying that. Now, we know of the violent protests demanding the dissolution of the embattled transitional government. What can we expect on that front now going forward with all these developments in mind?
We are done. Are you still with me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. The situation is that, first of all, the government in Sudan is a coalition government of the civilian and of course the military combined to run a joint government. And because of this, there are several good things that have happened. For example, the several armed groups that were operating in Sudan, in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, they have an agreement with the government, and most of their leaders have now gone to Khartoum, taken up political position. They have stopped fighting. Their troops, however, are not yet together with the national army, so the troops are still separate, but they have formed at least a government. And then the negatives, of course, of this freedom is that there are several demonstrations that normally take place, as we said earlier. There are those that are pro-military, they want the military to take over control. There are those that are pro-civilian, they want civilian to take total control. And these kinds of demonstrations tend to cause a lot of disruptions in the city center. Businesses cannot operate well. People have to close their shops or their businesses. Some of the banks cannot operate. They have to close. So some people complain. They say that this continuous freedom that people are expressing and so on is disrupting their daily lives, is disrupting their businesses. So this is where the conflict is. Whereas there are those who think that the civilians should take full control. But then there are some positives that have also been achieved internationally, like Sudan was among the countries that were listed as sponsors of terrorists. Now there is progress in terms of them being removed from that list. Yes, American companies are investing in the country. Several financial institutions are trying to support the Sudan. So there are some positives. However, the freedom has come with some negatives. That is why there are conflicting groups in the Sudan.
Right, Patrick. Also, what can you tell us about the practical implications of all these developments and also on the democratic aspirations of the Sudanese people? We've heard of an internet shutdown so far.
Yeah, there are a lot of negative implications in regard to this military takeover. Number one is that the armed groups in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains, in Blue Nile, who are not yet really integrated into the national army, are likely to resume fighting if the military takes over. That means all that the civilian government did is likely to be dismantled. Therefore, you expect Sudan to start going back to military confrontations again. Coming to the East African region or to the Horn of Africa, Sudan has now been building good relationship with neighbors like South Sudan. The border between the two countries were closed since 2012. But now, this month, there has been a plan to open the border so that people can move freely. These kind of progress are likely to be all, stopped as the military will try to consolidate power. And then we are likely to see a lot of repressive activities, like you will not see demonstration anymore in Sudan. There will be nobody who will come out to demonstrate against the military if the military are in charge. Even if you have something burning, you will not come out to talk about. And then don't think about elections also soon, because that means the military will want to first of all consolidate power. And this is all coming because in the Sudan history, all the leaders in the Sudan have actually been, in a way, military leaders. So this is a new thing. Coming to have a civilian kind of a government is a new thing, a new thinking, which many people are not ready to really accept.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us with all the latest on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.